Hello everyone, my name is Peter Richmond. I'm a paediatrician and immunisation researcher from Australia, and it's my pleasure today to talk to you about the advances we've made through using immunisation, and particularly how we've used vaccines that can be given by different routes. I work for the Perth Children's Hospital, the University of Western Australia and the Kids Research Institute of Australia. Here are my disclosures. I've worked for a number of different vaccine companies in the order to make sure we get vaccines to those who need it most. So today what I wanted to do was really cover the need for vaccinations. How have we got to where we are now? What are the different sorts of vaccines that we can use and why do we give them in a particular way? So we understand what is it about the route of vaccination that makes it work so well. And I also wanted to talk about some of the safety aspects and really also look to the future of where we might go with vaccines to even get better protection for both children and adults. So it's important to think about vaccines are designed to prevent infectious diseases that can enter the body through different routes, either through the respiratory tract or the intestinal tract, or even through direct contact. And also they cause disease in different ways. So depending on how we acquire the infection and which part of the body it affects most, will influence the sorts of vaccines that we need to use. And there are a number of different ways that we can do this. Because what we're really trying to do is we're trying to mimic the infection so that we get the best possible immunity. We can give vaccines through an injection into the muscle or under the skin into the subcutaneous tissue. We can give them orally, or even more recently we've started to give vaccines through the nasal route, and we can also do it through the skin. So history shows us that we can prevent many different diseases in both children and adults by using different vaccines. We have been developing vaccination against infectious disease for over 1,000 years. Initially in China by giving intranasal smallpox material to try and prevent infection, and then using a related virus, cowpox, by Edward Jenner in the United Kingdom in the 1700s to prevent smallpox. This was given by an injection under the skin. We also have then progressed to protect against many other diseases. Rabies with Louis Pasteur, the turn of the century. The BCG vaccine, which was a live attenuated vaccine that initially was given orally by Calmette to infants to stop them getting tuberculosis, but now is given as an injection under the skin and has led to be one of the most commonly vaccines given to children. In the 1930s, we started to see the development of whole bacterial vaccines with whooping cough, as well as making immunisations against tetanus and diphtheria, which also helped protect against those severe diseases. As we learnt more about vaccines and more about the immune system, we were able to develop polio vaccines that could be either given as an injection into the muscle or orally. We also developed live attenuated viruses with measles, mumps and rubella that could all be given as injections under the skin and give high levels of protection. And with a lot of work using an intradermal approach to smallpox, we were eventually enabled to eradicate it in the 1700s. So this is a disease we no longer have to worry about. Later on in the 1980s, we started to develop oral rotavirus vaccines that has been very successful at preventing gastroenteritis, which is one of the important causes of hospitalisation in children. And then in the 1990s, we started to develop conjugate vaccines, which were designed to prevent some of our most serious infections, such as pneumococcal disease and meningococcal disease. And they were introduced with widespread effects, including decreasing the spread of pneumococcal disease in our community. More recently, vaccines have advanced even more quickly. We have started to introduce live attenuated nasal influenza vaccines that provide protection in children against influenza. We have also been able to develop a vaccine that can be given as an injection to prevent human papillomavirus infection, a very important cause of cervical cancer in women. And this has been very effective. And we are now starting to see even newer technologies, such as microneedle patches that don't require an injection at all. The COVID pandemic was an opportunity to use a lot of different vaccine platforms that were predominantly given by injections, but some given by nasal spray or through the skin. And looking forward, RSV can now be prevented by intramuscular vaccinations as well as monoclonal antibodies. Finally, we have now seen vaccines for prevention of RSV infection in both adults and newborn children through intramuscular injections, but we are also starting to see the development of a nasal vaccine for RSV infection, which may help protect young children. So I think it is important that we understand that all these vaccines have been able to have significant impact on diseases, and they all can be given in different ways. The most common immunisation by far, though, is intramuscular injections of vaccines. This is usually given into the upper arm or the thigh of a child or an adult. And these are very particularly suited for those diseases where we get circulation of bacteria or viruses in the blood, and so having serum antibodies in the bloodstream is protective. And this is particularly suited to intramuscular injections. It's also good for preventing diseases that are caused by toxins such as whooping cough or pertussis, diphtheria and tetanus. And again, those antibodies in the blood are able to neutralise the toxins before they cause severe disease. So really, this is a very common approach that's also been used for lots of other vaccines, such as influenza, RSV, Hib, Haemophilus influenzae type B, and hepatitis. So many different diseases, but all where serum antibodies are very important in protection. And this level of protection is what we call a correlative protection, and is used to develop the vaccines and make sure that they continue to work as we broaden their protection against different strains. One downside, however, is they may not elicit such a strong cellular or mucosal immune response. So that is at the site of the infection, such as the nose or in the gut for some of those other diseases. So they may need different sorts of vaccines for optimal protection. We also know that some vaccines, such as the pneumococcal and meningococcal conjugate vaccines, actually develop very high levels of antibodies in the nose and do stop carriage, which stops them spreading it, and that gives rise to herd immunity. So by vaccinating children, we can actually protect the whole community by decreasing the spread. HPV vaccines for cervical cancer are also able to stop the spread between individuals, and that's been very successful with the adolescents being immunised with that particular vaccine. Other vaccines may not necessarily go into the muscle but still need a needle to go into the skin. This is typically on the outer arm or sometimes on the thigh or abdomen. These are somewhat easier to administer than an intramuscular vaccine, but they may have more variable absorption. So they tend to be mostly used for live attenuated viruses such as measles, mumps and rubella or chickenpox. And again, these diseases have been associated with a viremic phase, so the virus is in the blood, and so that's where those neutralising antibodies work very well. However, for some diseases that are spread from the gut, such as rotavirus and polio, may need different vaccines. So these can be given as a live attenuated or weakened virus by the mouth. And this is particularly important because not only do you stimulate production of antibodies in the lining of the gut, you also produce antibodies that are in the serum, and so these can be measured. These are generally very well tolerated, although they can cause some mild gastrointestinal side effects such as diarrhoea or vomiting. And sometimes the absorption of these vaccines can be difficult. A good example is oral polio vaccine, which has been the most common way polio vaccines have been administered throughout the world. Although we do see one of the downsides is that you can sometimes have these weakened strains potentially causing some disease. And so that's something we all have to think about, and is why we're now looking at injectable polio vaccines to really complete polio eradication. Another way of improving protection, particularly for respiratory infections, is targeting the nose. And this is because this is where the entry of the virus or the bacteria first occurs. And so that we need to have immunity in those upper airways to stop that infection occurring in the first place. And certainly for things such as influenza and whooping cough, the protection for the nasal infection has not been as good. An example of these new nasal vaccines being developed are the live attenuated influenza virus vaccine, which has been around for 20 years. But now we're starting to see vaccines for RSV, for whooping cough, and even for COVID, all in development. And we would expect to see some of these being used in the next 5 years. An advantage of having a nasal vaccine is you don't need needles, so it's very easy to administer. And in fact, the intranasal influenza vaccine can now be administered at home in the United States. It's also very good for vaccinating large groups, such as school children, and as you don't need to have so much time in between immunisations, so you can vaccinate the whole class much quicker. There are some issues though. You have to look after these live attenuated viruses, so the storage has to be appropriate. And also you may develop some cold-like symptoms. So this has made it difficult to develop these sorts of vaccines for very young babies. We also know that occasionally you can have wheezing illnesses triggered by, say, an influenza live attenuated vaccine. So safety is always very important to monitor for this sort of vaccines. And finally, we have intradermal vaccines. So this is where you're actually utilising the fact that the skin is a very complex immune organ that needs very little of the vaccine antigen to actually stimulate an immune response. And not only that, it also tends to stimulate your cellular immunity very well. This requires a limited volume, but sometimes this can be difficult to administer, such as the BCG vaccine, where it's a very detailed and technical procedure that needs training. There are now new vaccines that are being developed to deliver vaccines through the skin. There's devices that can inject it under high pressure with either powder or fluid, but also we're starting to see these other sorts of targeting measures such as microneedles or using something to make the skin a bit more porous, so even just taking the outer layer of the skin off enables some vaccines to be delivered directly through the skin. However, one of the most exciting things, I think, in terms of dermal vaccine delivery is microneedle patches. So this is where you put the vaccine antigen on very tiny needles that can then be put on a patch that goes through just that top layer of the skin. It doesn't hurt. And then the antigen slowly separates from the microneedles and is taken by the immune system to stimulate a local response. Now, these are very promising. They seem to have very little in the way of side effects. However, we're yet to see the degree of protection that you can achieve and whether or not the levels of antibodies will be high enough to give long-term protection against the diseases such as influenza and other diseases that are being developed with this approach. So hopefully you would agree that we have made significant public health advances through the use of immunisation, probably one of the most important public health measures that we have at our disposal to decrease the burden of disease in the community. And that we need to understand the immunity to these diseases may require a different approach with a vaccine. And so we will see vaccines with different use, such as intramuscular, intranasal, across the skin or orally. And this may be also more effective ways of stopping transmission in the community and giving everyone that benefit. I think we're going to see in the future many new technologies where these vaccines will be able to prevent even more diseases and more effectively. What we really want to see is a call to action for both the community, industry and health providers to maximise the benefit of these technologies to prevent infectious diseases in our community. Thank you. And if you'd like to learn more information, particularly about RSV, I would ask you to go to the vaccinate Learning Hub, where we have a large number of teaching and training materials regarding RSV and its treatment and prevention. Thank you.